Welcome back to Kinetics and Reaction Mechanisms in Catalyst University. My name is Kevin Tokoph. Make sure to like this video and subscribe. In this video and the next couple of videos, we're going to go over reactivity of inorganic complexes. Now we know by now that inorganic complexes, regardless of the geometry, are going to incorporate a metal, a central atom, surrounded by a series of some number of ligands. All right. Now in this video we're going to go over what makes metals reactive or not reactive. Okay. Now before we go into the general rules, I want to mention several things because there's some very important pieces of terminology and they are very often misused. All right. Remember from your general chemistry course that there is really no relation between energy and rate. Okay? So when you want to talk about stability and kinetics, there's really no real connection necessarily between either one of them. Okay? That means that even if you have a reaction whose, in terms of stability and energy, we would say is thermodynamically favorable, it might take millions of years to happen. Okay? A great example of this is the reaction, it's an enzymatic reaction of a rhododilate decarboxylase. It's thermodynamically favorable, it has a negative delta G. Okay? But uncatalyzed, that reaction would take 32 million years. Okay? So it's also sort of like the conversion of all carbon into graphite. Okay? That process is spontaneous thermodynamically, but kinetically it would take billions of years or whatever the number is. Okay, so kinetics does not directly correlate to thermodynamics really in any way. All right, the first two terms up here, stable and unstable, these are terms that have to do with energy and thermodynamics. Okay, when you say something is stable, okay, what you generally mean is that it's low in energy. Okay, it's low in energy. When you say something's unstable, it is high in energy. And when we're talking about the energy, in particular, we're talking about the delta G, or Gibbs free energy, with these. These are thermodynamic terms. Okay, so every reaction that we're going to do is going to go from either something stable to something more unstable, or something unstable to something more stable. And depending on the sign of the delta G, you can predict whether or not that reaction will occur without any input of energy or not. If you had a positive delta G, you need energy input into the reaction. If it's negative, you don't. Okay? But stability or instability, or something being unstable, that has to do with the relative energy of the reacting species and the products. That's energy. And what stability tells you is whether something is likely to occur with or without an input of energy. When we talk about reactivity, the bottom two, those are kinetic terms. Those are specifically referring to the rate of reaction. They don't say whether or not it's favorable or not favorable thermodynamically. They don't say whether you have to put energy in or you don't to get the reaction to go. These are simply about the speed of the reaction. Labile is another term for reactive. If something is labile, it reacts very easily, very quickly. It means it's reactive. If something is not reactive, we say it's non-labile or inert. Okay, so you've probably heard from Gen Chem that noble gases in group 8 don't do anything. Another name for noble gases are inert gases. They don't generally react with things. Okay, so if something doesn't react, and it's very slow to do a reaction, you would say it's more or less non-labile or inert. If something reacts very quickly, you would say that's labile. Okay? A good example of something that is labile, you ever done that thing when you were a kid where you made the volcano and you poured, I think it was vinegar in baking soda, right? You put baking soda in the base of the volcano, you poured some, I forget what it is, vinegar, I don't remember, but you poured it in there, right? And it bubbled up. That reaction and those molecules would be considered labile in that case. Versus the rusting of steel, that is spontaneous, but it's slow to happen, so we would say that would be inert. Okay? Now, from the perspective of inorganic, we'd like to understand and create a general set of rules by which most things abide to determine whether or not something is labile or inert. And anytime on this list you see something that says non-labile, it means inert. All right? And I'm going to frequently switch with the periodic table. So the first general rule is all S-block elements except for beryllium and magnesium are very labile. So S-block elements except beryllium and magnesium. So that's with the exception of these two right here. So if we're talking about lithium, sodium, potassium, calcium, generally things in this area other than these two, element 4 and 12, they're going to be labile. Okay? Meaning they're going to be very reactive. We're going to more or less skip the second point, but if you have a metal in the F block, so your F orbital elements down there, the lanthanides and actinides, if they have a 3+ charge on them, they're generally very labile. We're not going to be dealing much with F block elements just because they're not used a whole lot for a lot of things that we're requiring. If we have a D10 complex, that's generally very labile. And let's maybe talk about why that is. D10 for the octahedral splitting diagram. So let's assume it's octahedral, okay? I don't care if it's high spin or low spin, it's going to be the same no matter what. So why don't we just fill in electrons? More or less reactive than iron 3+. Well, it's in the first row, so generally iron 2+ is going to be more reactive. In the 3+ state, it'll be less reactive, it'll be a little more inert. Okay, and you can generally do that comparison with most things in here, okay, including zinc. Also, if we look at D3 metals or D6 complexes that are low spin, those are going to be very non-labile or inert. Let's talk about why that is. And again, we're going to look at the octahedral splitting diagram for these. So over here, I'm going to do the D3, and then I'm going to do D6 low spin over here. All right? So let's go ahead and fill those in. All right? So for D3, it's just this. All right? One of the things that makes this situation very inert or non-labile is because you have symmetry in these degenerate orbitals. Each one of those degenerate orbitals, remember these are the T2G, we are going a ways back, and this is the EG up here. Same over here. But whenever we have symmetry throughout the orbitals of any kind, in fact, we could even consider there's symmetry up here. They're all empty in the EG. Whenever there's complete symmetry in degenerate orbitals, that tends to make things a little less reactive. And when it's D3, they're generally very inert. If we come and look at D6 low spin, we're just going to put these electrons in like this because it's low spin. Again, there's symmetry in the degenerate orbitals. In the EG, there's none, and in all the T2G orbitals down here, there's 2 in each. And because of that symmetry, generally D3 and D6 low spin are going to be very inert. Now, one thing I want to show you why it has to be D6 low spin. Let's look at the high spin case. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right. We don't have that absolute symmetry. If I look down here, if I look up at the EG, there is symmetry, but in the T2G, notice there's not. This orbital down here has 2, the other 2 have 1. There's not symmetry. So for high spin, this one is not as inert. In fact, that one's going to be a little bit more on the labile side. Okay, so for some of these, you may have to go ahead and look at the octahedral splitting field diagram to really get an intuitive understanding as to why something is reactive or inert. Okay? And the last rule that we're going to go over are second and third row transition metal complexes are generally non-labile. They're generally fairly inert. Okay? That means if we're talking about something from yttrium over to cadmium or lutetium, I'm not exactly sure how you pronounce that, over to mercury, anything in the second row or third row, those are generally going to be pretty inert. Okay? In fact, a general rule of thumb is as you go down the periodic table, these metals become more inert. And we saw that the first rows were more labile, and you could probably guess the third rows are going to be a little more inert than the second row. So second and third row, generally non-labile inert, and that's generally because they're low spin. Okay, second and third row transition metals tend to be more stable have a tendency to be more stable in the low spin state, and that also facilitates non-lability or being inert. Okay, so this is how you ultimately determine from the metals perspective whether or not something is more reactive or more inert. Okay, and typical questions could be, if they give you a periodic table, they could say, well, if I have, let's say, cobalt 2 plus and cobalt 3 plus, which one would be more labile? Or same thing with iron 2 plus, iron 3 plus. Okay, those are just general trends to follow. Okay. In the next video, we're going to do the same kind of thing, but we're going to look at it from the ligands perspective. Because it turns out with some things you can do a comparison of the ligands and determine whether or not something's going to be more reactive or less reactive. Alright, so make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for future videos and notifications. Thank you.